Condemned. Julian Mercer, Book 1. Written by G.K.Parks. Narrated by Danny Holt. Chapter 26. In the aftermath of the firefight, 3 men were dead. A trail of blood led from the center of the hallway to the exit Isaac Arman took. The hallway was roped off. Hospital personnel moved nearby patients to other rooms, attempting to avoid disturbing the crime scene any more than necessary. Katia and Ben were still in the same room, being questioned by the police. Since Ben was no longer a patient, he was being held as a material witness. Mercer caught a glimpse of the two. Ben had his arm wrapped around Katia's quaking shoulders as she explained what happened and why. "Call Bastion," Mercer mouthed to them. Blood ran down his arm, but until the police determined he wasn't responsible, they were willing to let him suffer. He was seated in a chair with his hands handcuffed behind his back. The irony that he was in a similar position to John Welks was not lost on him, and despite the gravity of the situation, he snorted. "Is something funny?" one of the officers asked. "You think it's funny to kill a few cops? What can you tell me about your partner?" "He's not my partner. His name is Isaac Arman, and someone hired him to murder Benjamin Styler." "Yeah, and according to the reports I read, you assaulted Styler in this very hospital not too long ago." Mercer sighed. "I need to speak to Detective Rawlins." "You need a lot of things. Too bad I don't give a shit." The cop shoved Mercer sideways, knocking him against the wall and forcing him to land on top of his bleeding arm. "Maybe you need to stop being so klutzy." He yanked Mercer back to an upright position. "If you cooperate, maybe I'll even get a doctor to look at that arm." "Check the security footage. I tried to stop him, not aid his escape." "Oh, so you want me to just leave you here unattended so you can disappear too? I don't think so." Before the cop could say anything else, Katia and Ben were escorted from the hospital room. "You saved us. Again," Katia exclaimed, kneeling next to Mercer. Her fingertips traced the skin near the gunshot wound, and Mercer bit back a hiss, looking away. "I'm sorry." She spun in a circle, searching for someone who could patch him up. Not finding a single paramedic or nurse, she turned to the officer. "He protected us." She stepped between Mercer and the man interrogating him. "Can't you see he needs help? Why aren't you helping him?"
Miss."
Another cop tried to pull her away.
We need to take you down to the station to answer more questions."
"Go with them, but call Bastion and have him meet you there. He'll protect you," Mercer said before the officers led Ben and Katia away. "Who's Bastion? Is that the shooter?" the same officer from before asked. "Listen to me very carefully," Mercer said. "Isaac Arman was hired to perform the hit on Benjamin Styler. Detective Rawlins is investigating. My team and I are assisting." "Your team? How many of you are there? I need names." "Good luck, because I'm not saying another word." Mercer clenched his jaw and gave the officer a dead-eye stare. "We'll see if you don't change your tune." The man put his hand on Mercer's shoulder, the same one that had recently been dislocated and grazed by a bullet, and gave it a hard squeeze. "It's just a matter of time." Mercer hid the flinch masterfully. The cop stepped away, taking a seat at the nurse's station. He stared at Mercer, locked in a battle of wits. But Mercer had experienced far worse than this. He wouldn't crack. He was more likely to pass out from blood loss than he was to utter another word to a stubborn copper who was doing little to track down the man who murdered 3 of his brothers in blue. Just as Mercer started to get woozy, Rawlins appeared at the end of the hallway, accompanied by a few members of the police brass. Although no one spoke to him, Mercer could hear muttered words about the security cam footage taken during the time of the shooting. Reluctantly, the officer from earlier came around the desk to unlock the handcuffs. "Looks like you're in the clear for now," the officer said.
"We need to ask you some questions,"
another man with captain bars said.
"But first, let's get you stitched up."
"Fine." Mercer looked down, noting the small pool of blood below the chair from his injury. "Isaac Arman's been shot. He'll need medical supplies or assistance.
You need to monitor area doctors, hospitals, vets, and pharmacy supply centers. It's already being done. We've issued a bolo. His description was broadcast over the wire. We'll find him."
Rawlins moved closer, whispering to Mercer,
"It seems you and I have some things to discuss in private."
Turning to his superiors, he said,
"Captain, I'll take Mr. Mercer to the ER, and we'll meet you back at the station after they stitch him up."
One of the men nodded, and Rawlins led Mercer down the hallway, away from the mess and the other officers.
"Are Katia and Ben safe?"
Mercer asked.
"Of course they're safe. They're at the station. Plus your pal, the friendly one, is with them. He was concerned about how well you were holding up. Care to tell me what happened?"
"Someone hired Armin to orchestrate a hit on Styler. Since Armin missed the first time, he came back to try again."
"How does this relate to the car crash I heard a little something about?"
"Unimportant details."
"Somehow, I doubt that."
"It is none of your concern. Why did the protection detail leave? Why didn't the responding officers take down Armin after he killed 3 of their own?" Rage boiled to the surface, skyrocketing Mercer's blood pressure and causing him to teeter. Rawlins ducked underneath Julian's good arm to steady him as they continued toward the ER. "Right now, I'm having a hell of a time trusting any of you."
"I'm not your enemy. You're not under arrest. We're trying to piece this mess together, and for the record—"
Rawlins passed Mercer off to a nurse who helped him onto a waiting bed.
"I wouldn't have let that bastard get away."
The nurse went to find a doctor.
"I'm glad you put 2 slugs in him, but why couldn't you have taken a better shot? Aren't you supposed to be some hardcore Green Beret or something?"
"Retired Special Air Service. And your men seemed content enough to pop off quite a few shots at me. Care to explain why they didn't do the same to Armin? I'm not in favor of friendly fire."
"I'm sure they did all they could. Let the doc fix you up, and we'll discuss this at the station."
The detective stepped away, calling over his shoulder,
"With the rate things are going, maybe I'll get you your own desk, right next to mine."
"I'd rather put a bullet through my own head," Mercer retorted, and Rawlins chuckled, muttering a few inappropriate suggestions under his breath. After far too much poking and prodding, Mercer's arm was bandaged and placed in a sling. He was instructed to avoid a list of things due to the mild concussion he had sustained during the crash. Other than that, he was given antibiotics to stave off any infections from the gunshot wound and was free to go.
"You still look like shit."
Rawlins led him to a waiting, unmarked cruiser.
"Are you sure you're capable of protecting Katia Road and Benjamin Styler in your current condition? The captain's been urging them to consent to protective custody, but she's adamantly opposed. Perhaps you could persuade her to listen."
"I'm not here to do your bidding. From what I've seen, there is absolutely no reason why she should trust the authorities."
"How did you reach that conclusion? Or is that just your paranoia kicking in?"
"Someone with deep pockets hired Armin. Do you have any idea who that might be?"
"Not yet. We're working on it."
"So are we." Mercer maneuvered his arm out of the sling and balled up the blue mesh. "Whoever is behind this can afford to buy off people in positions of power. You've said so yourself, Detective. Unless you're personally planning to keep watch on Katia and Ben, I think they'd be safer elsewhere."
"Unfortunately, you might be right."
Chapter 27.
"Glad to see you're all right."
Bastian nodded to Mercer.
"Katia had one hell of a story to tell, but it seems you fared rather well."
"It was nothing I couldn't handle. Where are the lovebirds now?"
"A few officers are taking their statements. Carlton showed up. Their personal rendition of World War III played out in the middle of the squad room."
Bastian leaned in.
"Donovan's tracking Armin. He thinks he's found his staging ground. With any luck, he'll be able to determine where the bastard lives. That is, if the police don't locate him first. Do you think he's gone to ground?"
"No. He won't stop until the contract's carried out. I put 2 in his gut, and he kept going. It didn't even slow him down. He must be accustomed to pain. What else have you dug up on his history?"
"You know the basics. He performed unsanctioned assassinations for the government before becoming his own boss. I'll keep digging, but Donovan can handle it from here. There isn't anything in Armin's background that'll give us a leg up." The coppers are already digging into every ounce of information they can find, but they don't have him in their sights. Unfortunately, we don't either.
What about the man who hired him? He needs to be our primary focus. Armin is just a symptom of the underlying disease. Mercer glanced behind him to make sure they were alone.
Right. Just like a deadly fever is only a symptom of the flu.
Bastian rubbed his cheek.
I've analyzed the bank information, Piper Investigations database records, and the photographs we uncovered. But you aren't going to like where it leads.
Which is?
Around in a bloody circle. Significant funds have poured out of Carlton Road's business account and filtered into Piper Investigations through the newspaper, which isn't that odd. But the cash withdrawals from Carlton's personal account match the amount that was moved from Welks's hidden account into Piper. It makes Carlton look guilty as sin, especially since Welks said the source of the cryptic email messages originated internally from Carlton's newspaper. Carlton has connections to hired guns from his old reporter days, and that one questionable newspaper article he wrote. He has contacts, means, and motive. According to Detective Rawlins, that's all we need to make criminal charges stick.
I thought you didn't believe Carlton was capable of hiring a hitman to off his future son-in-law.
I don't,
Bastian sighed.
But Rawlins seems pretty sure, and he is a trained investigator.
Why haven't the police arrested Carlton Road? Or better yet, why hasn't Carlton called off Armin since Katia knows the truth about Ben, but still refuses to leave his side? Mercer narrowed his eyes. Carlton might not be a man to reckon with, but this is nothing more than an elaborate setup by someone intimately aware of Carlton's activities. Mercer laughed. Bloody hell, you've swayed me to your side of the argument, Baz.
It's about time you listened to me. So now what do we do?
We find Armin, make him talk, and put him down. Mercer saw the unsettled look on Bastian's face. He's killed 3 cops. Casualties don't seem to be one of his concerns.
Jules, you tried to stop him.
If I had really tried, I would have put 2 in the back of his head when he was inside the car. Mercer paused. How did he get out of the car and escape when sirens and lights were looming in the distance? Spinning on his heel, he stomped back toward the break room. Rawlins, I need a word. By the end of it, details were hashed out, the city's CCTV feeds were analyzed, and the parts of the police investigation Rawlins was privy to were shared with Mercer and Bastian. Within less than a minute of Mercer's departure from the crashed vehicle, Armin climbed out of the car and took refuge in a nearby alley, eluding the camera feed and disappearing before the investigators could identify the people involved. The rat had crawled back to whatever hole he crawled out of.
I don't like being accused of things,
Rawlins huffed. Neither do I, but you gave me this information. You've been helping me and my team. Obviously, you don't believe your comrades can be trusted. What haven't you told us? Mercer asked.
Look,
Rawlins lowered his voice.
There's been speculation that Carlton Road sourced out the hit. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence to support that theory, but we can't touch him without a smoking gun, since he's close friends with my lieutenant, and he's been known to rub elbows with the police commissioner and the mayor at black tie affairs. That being said, I'd personally like to make sure everything is on the up and up before I jeopardize anyone's life or my career. As you can see, we've already lost 3 good men, and now we're out for blood.
He swallowed, blinking and looking away.
Damn it. I'm sorry.
Bastian squeezed the detective's shoulder.
Were you close? I knew 2 of them personally. I trained Stan when he first got out of the academy, and Tom's wife is about to give birth to their first kid. Now that boy's going to grow up without a dad. That sick son of a bitch is going to pay.
He will, Mercer promised. But in the meantime, I can't afford for your officers to kill Armin when we don't know who hired him. Do you know anything more than what's already been said?
The only thing left is the surveillance footage taken from Styler's apartment building. The 2 men Katia saw leaving haven't been identified yet, but I'll give you a copy of the photos.
He looked at Bastian.
It seems you have your own methods of determining facts.
Indeed. Bastian nodded, and Rollins went into another room to retrieve the data.
What are we doing about Katya and Ben? Armin should be out of commission for the immediate future, but according to what you said, he won't stop until the job's done.
You will take them to the safe house we established. Ring hands and have him meet you there. 2 of us will remain on site to guard them at any given time. I know it will make tracking Armin more difficult, but we don't have much of a choice, especially since we have minimal intel on Armin's 2 accomplices from the alley. Mercer thought for a second. Have you spoken to Welks?
Not yet. By the time I had the information, the news had broken about the hospital shooting. Hans should be there now.
Does he know what to do?
Yes.
Bastian eyed Mercer uneasily.
What are you planning to do?
I'm not entirely sure.
That's never good.
Rollins returned with the information.
We should be finishing up with Katya and Ben if you'd like a word with them.
Mercer let the detective lead the way to the interrogation room.
Mr. Mercer, thank you.
Katya gave him a hug.
This is the 2nd time you've come to our rescue. I don't know what would have happened if you weren't there.
She kissed his cheek. Rollins jerked his chin at the door, and the officer nodded and left the room.
You have to do something to keep us safe. The police want us to stay in custody, but I don't want to be locked up like a criminal.
My team is prepared to move you to an undisclosed location until Armin and the man who hired him are stopped. Mercer eyed Styler, wondering what else he failed to mention. Ms. Rode, I was hired to keep you safe, and the farther you are from Mr. Styler, the safer you'll be.
I didn't leave Ben in that alley, and I'm not leaving him now.
She looked disgusted.
You sound like my father.
Ma'am, do you think he could be involved? Rollins asked, but Katya frowned.
Are you sure you don't want to remain under police protection? We will do our best to keep you safe. Like how the officers at the hospital kept us safe? I don't think so.
Her frown turned into an angry glare.
It looks like they're your problem now.
Rollins patted Mercer on the back. They always were. As soon as the 3 of them were alone, Mercer sat across from Katya and Ben. We need to have a conversation. Before I take either of you anywhere, we need to get to the bottom of a few things. First, tell me exactly what your father said to you today. If he has any idea who might want to frame him, we need to know now. Next, he held out the photos. I want you to tell me precisely who these blokes are. Ben took the photos and studied them carefully, while Katya explained how her father insisted she come home. But Carlton hadn't said or done anything to indicate he knew more than he let on. Who are they? Mercer asked Ben. Are those your business associates?
I don't recognize them.
Odd, considering they're exiting your apartment, Mercer said.
I know. I was home that day.
Ben's brow furrowed, and he ran his thumb over the date and timestamp.
It was our anniversary. Remember, Kat?
He handed her the photos.
You came by for brunch, and we stayed at my place for a few hours. Then we went out to dinner and a show later that night. Yeah, I remember.
She shifted her gaze from the pictures to Ben.
I told Mr. Mercer I remembered seeing 2 men leave your apartment that day.
Her voice grew harsh.
Are you lying to me, Benjamin?
I'm not lying. No one else came to my house that day.
And you were there the entire time?
Bastian asked.
Uh-huh.
So, how come you don't remember 2 men leaving your apartment? Mercer asked. What were you doing immediately before Katya arrived?
Ben
scrunched his face together, contemplating what happened weeks ago.
I got up, made brunch, popped some muffins in the oven, took a shower, ordered flowers, checked the market and did some work.
Flowers. Mercer's mind flashed to yellow roses, and he inhaled, shaking off the distraction. Did you pick them up?
No, they were delivered.
To your front door?
Bastian was working on a theory, but wasn't ready to share it.
No, they were left in the lobby. I ran downstairs to grab them. I wasn't even gone 5 minutes.
I'll get a complete copy of the video footage,
Bastian said, leaving the room. Fair warning. If you're lying, you will regret it, Mercer said.
I'm not.
Ben gulped. On his best day, Julian Mercer was intimidating, and on his worst, he was downright scary. And today wasn't one of his better days. Chapter 28. Leaving the station that evening was a harrowing experience. Mercer had to give his statement, turn over his firearm as evidence in the hospital shooting, and call in a few favors from federal agencies on both sides of the pond to avoid being stuck in police custody for 48 hours. Thankfully, he still had friends in government, despite his forced retirement. Bastian cloned Katya's phone, gave her an untraceable throwaway, and placed her cell in Detective Rowland's desk drawer, along with Ben's. Since Armin could be tracking Katya and Ben's movements via their phone, this would make it more difficult. But the only way to end this was to find the person who ordered the hit. The possibilities were endless. Everyone wanted a piece of Ben. His business associates, clients, Jack Pierce, any of Katya's former boyfriends, stalkers, or even a random run-of-the-mill psychopath. But that didn't take into account the slew of individuals who had an axe to grind with newspaper mogul Carlton Road. Bastian's first order of business would be to cross-reference the two lists of suspects and focus on the overlap. Perhaps killing Styler wasn't personal, but it was the best way to place the blame on Carlton Road. After all, Styler was a blackmailer of sorts, and Carlton had his future son-in-law investigated. It made sense that the overprotective and vengeful father would take extreme measures to ensure his daughter's safety, even to the point of hiring a hitman. So far, the intel they'd gathered added up to a well-endowed benefactor with access to Carlton's newspaper. So if it wasn't Carlton, who was it? Donovan was tracking Armin. Hans was interrogating the private eye they'd taken captive. Bastian was analyzing the police data and piecing the facts together. And Mercer was barely managing not to end up behind bars, which might have been the hardest job of all.
"I'll take them to our safe house,"
Bastian whispered in Mercer's ear, leaving the commander to finish the paperwork with Detective Rawlins.
"Rendezvous when you get the chance. Hans will meet us there."
"Fine, but there are a few things that require my attention first. I'll check in with Donovan, and we'll meet you at the prearranged location." He grabbed Bastian's arm, halting his procession. "We have to end this quickly. If whoever hired Armin saw the news report, a secondary team might be set to move."
"Are you serious?"
Rawlins asked, interrupting the exchange. "Wouldn't you have a contingency plan?" Mercer asked.
"Only if I were that desperate to kill someone. But the smart thing would be to pack up and write it off as a loss,"
Rawlins said. Mercer put the final touches on the forms. "Are we done?" Rawlins scanned the sheet.
"Yeah, we're done."
He watched Mercer slide uneasily into his jacket.
"When you find Armin, give me a call."
Rawlins lowered his timbre so his voice wouldn't carry.
"It makes no difference to me what condition he's in. No questions asked. You have my word."
"I thought you weren't in favor of mercenary work or a body count?"
"That was before. Circumstances have changed."
Climbing into a taxi, Mercer told the cabbie to take him to Carlton Road's newspaper and settled into the back seat. The authorities were on high alert. If another crazed motorist wanted to make a run at Mercer, now was the least opportune time to do it. Thankfully, the only kamikaze drivers on the road were the usual rush-hour variety. Paying the man, Mercer exited in front of the building, took a breath, and marched inside. He wanted answers.
"Can I help you?"
Carlton's assistant, Donna, asked. "No." Mercer continued to the closed door with the gold nameplate.
"Sir, I really must insist,"
she began, but Mercer barged inside. She came up behind him.
"Mr. Road, shall I call security?"
"That won't be necessary, Donna."
Carlton studied Mercer.
"Why don't you take a seat?"
Once the door shut, Carlton stood, angry.
"Where is my daughter?"
"She's safe."
"No thanks to you,"
he glowered.
"I was at the police station when they took her statement. 3 men were killed. The person responsible escaped. I hired you to protect her. Obviously, I was mistaken in placing any faith in your abilities."
Waiting for the vilification to end, Mercer analyzed the dynamics of the room and Rhodes' personal effects. "Are you quite through?" he asked after a time. Carlton made a harumph noise, but didn't speak. "Very good. Whoever wants Ben dead works at the newspaper and knows intimate details about your habits and the investigation you asked John Welks to conduct. A member of my team will contact you. We need your employee information. If you refuse to divulge it, we'll get it another way. But I want to make one thing clear. If you know who did this, and can stop it, you better. Whenever the truth comes to light, I will end the person responsible, even if that's you. Do you understand?"
"How dare you?"
Carlton flushed a deep scarlet.
"I would never hurt Katya. She's the only thing that's important in this world,"
says the man who was back at work less than 6 hours after she was almost killed. Bloody brilliant. Mercer went to the door, opening it with such force that he almost knocked over the man on the other side.
"Excuse me,"
the man said. Mercer focused on his face for a split second. The man's expression read smug amusement, and he looked vaguely familiar.
"Daniel, get in here,"
Rode barked. The man brushed past Mercer and shut the door behind him. Mercer filed it away for later consideration and dialed Donovan on his way out of the building. They needed answers. Wasting more time with Carlton Road was not going to get them. Donovan gave Mercer his location. Then the two disconnected, and Mercer hailed another cab. He performed a continuous sweep, but no one followed him or the cab. After paying the driver, Mercer stepped out in front of a pub and went inside to find Donovan, seated in the back corner. It was the best and only strategic spot in the entire place. Mercer took a seat across from him, scanning the bar's mirrored back to ensure Armin wasn't hiding inside.
"Here,"
Donovan passed Mercer a gun under the table.
"Isaac Armin frequents this bar and does business out of the back room. I haven't spotted him, but if he's hurt, the owners would cover for him."
"Have you inquired as to his whereabouts?"
"Not yet."
Donovan tilted his chin toward the narrow hallway with 3 doors. 2 were restrooms. The other led to something else.
"It's locked. I wasn't sure how loudly I should knock."
He jerked his chin toward the door, and Mercer noticed the dark, reddish-brown blood smears.
"I'm guessing Armin's inside, either hiding out or getting patched up."
"Did you see him?" Mercer asked.
"No. I picked up his trail from what I can only assume is his staging ground, and followed him here. It's mostly speculation on my part, and it could turn out to be total rubbish."
"There's only one way to find out." Mercer headed for the door. He stopped in the narrow hallway, waiting for Donovan to join him. The bar was full of regulars, grizzled working-class people. But given the neighborhood, and the fact Isaac Armin used this bar to make contacts and run his business, going in loud would only draw unwanted attention, which could come with deadly repercussions. Knocking on the door, Mercer waited for a response. When none came, he tried again. "Yo, Isaac, let me in," Mercer said, once again making a feeble attempt at an American accent. "I got the stuff you wanted." Donovan cocked an eyebrow, remaining in the adjacent doorway of the men's room. The doorknob turned, and Mercer pressed his back against the wall, waiting for the door to open. As soon as it did, he shouldered his way inside. The woman inside the room screamed in surprise and ran into the bar. From the blood-soaked towels that littered the chair and floor, Mercer knew Armin had been here. "He's gone," Mercer declared after checking the entire room, noting a window large enough for a man to squeeze through.
"Jules, we have another problem,"
Donovan said, noting the crowd of burly men now blocking the exit. "Shit," Donovan snorted.
"Normally I'm with Hans when things like this happen."
Under different circumstances, Mercer wouldn't have minded a bar fight, but time was of the essence, and despite his invincible attitude, his shoulder ached after the dislocation and gunshot wound. "Let's make this quick."
"Right-o."
Donovan tossed a grin over his shoulder and sauntered into the center of the group. 6 men formed a circle in the middle of the room, armed with fat-covered muscles, half-empty beer bottles, and a random pool cue or dart.
"Why don't you chaps settle down? We just stepped in for a pint. We'll be on our way."
Donovan noted the bartender's stance. He shifted ever so slightly, bringing his handgun within reach while continuing his chummy exchange with the men. 3 of them decided to sit down and finish the rest of their beers, but the one with the pool cue and the 2 others seemed puffed up by the possibility of knocking in some heads.
"Who the hell do you think you are?"
one of them asked. Mercer stepped forward, and the men moved in closer to surround him.
"You think you can barge into our bar with your stupid accents and scare the shit out of Layla? It's time you learned some manners." "Listen, mate."
Donovan put a friendly hand against the man's arm.
"We don't want any trouble. It's best that we get going."
A bottle smashed nearby, and Mercer elbowed the nearest man in the gut, following through with an uppercut to the jaw that had the man teetering backwards. He kicked the man in the stomach, knocking him into 2 of the goons standing behind him. One of them sprawled across the table.
"I thought you said to do this quietly."
Donovan deflected a punch and retaliated with a right cross that broke the guy's jaw and downed him with one move. Glass broke, and 2 men grabbed Mercer. One wrenched his injured arm backward, and the other pummeled him in the stomach. Donovan ducked down, ramming the attacker with his shoulder and launching him out of the fray. He knocked the guy against the wall a few times until the man stopped throwing haphazard punches and crumpled to the floor. "Down!" Mercer ordered in time for Donovan to duck and roll before a man could crash a chair over his back. The man spun, focusing his rage on Mercer. He thrust the chair at Julian, cracking it ineffectively against the bar when Mercer sidestepped. The ratcheting of bullets in a double-barreled shotgun brought the fight to a sudden standstill, and the bartender stood with the business end pointed at Mercer.
"I'd reconsider, mate."
Donovan stepped closer, with the laser sight of his handgun trained on the bartender's head.
"We don't want any trouble. We're leaving. I'd suggest you don't stop us or follow us."
The bartender jerked his shotgun toward the door, and Donovan gave a curt nod, never lowering his weapon as he backed toward the exit. Mercer followed, turning at the door to survey the damage. 3 men were out cold, another 2 were bruised or bleeding, and a few looked like they might have shit themselves. "Much obliged, partner." Mercer exited the bar and headed down the street.
"You and your bloody westerns," Donovan said. "As soon as this job is over, I'm updating your movie collection with nothing but musicals."
Chapter 29. After scouting the area, Mercer and Donovan realized they lost track of Armin. The former SAS had no way of knowing how long it had been since Armin slipped out the back. With no other leads, Donovan backtracked, taking Mercer to the place Armin used to plan his kills. The large self-serve storage unit was housed inside a converted warehouse. Each individual unit had a roll-down steel door and cement walls. When they came to 203, Donovan picked the lock and rolled up the door, while Mercer took aim, prepared to decimate anyone inside.
"Bloody hell,"
Mercer said. 2 of the walls were covered in surveillance photos of Katya and Ben. Their apartments' blueprints were laid out. A list of restaurants and shops they frequented were enumerated. Their daily routine and estimated arrival and departure times were all listed in black and white. Isaac Armin was a professional who planned for every possibility. It was amazing his shot missed. If he had killed Ben in that alley, this would be over, and the contract killer would have gotten away clean. Unfortunately, the one factor Armin didn't prepare for was the appearance of Julian Mercer.
"That's not the half of it."
Donovan pulled a tarp off the wall. Beneath it were photos of Mercer.
"At least he got your good side."
"What about the rest of you? Has the entire team been compromised?"
"I don't think so. There's a shot or 2 of Baz, but that's all I found."
Thinking back, Mercer realized Armin didn't know which hospital room was Ben's. If he did, the shootout would have resulted in less collateral damage. Mercer scanned the photos, the maps, and the data. Armin even had miniature, made-to-scale facsimiles of the street, storefronts, and alleyway where he shot Ben. "Any idea who's working with him?" Mercer asked, stepping out of the storage unit.
"No."
"How did you find this place?"
After I determined which pub he uses to acquire clients, Baz pulled the nearby surveillance feed which led here. I broke into the manager's office, skimmed for names, but came up blank. So we kept an eye on the feed and monitored the people who came and went. Right after the hospital shooting, a man in dark clothes and a hood stopped by. I didn't get a good look at him, but he appeared injured. So I headed straight here.
Why didn't you intervene when he was in your sights?
Because by the time I found this,
Donovan gestured to the room, frustrated.
he was already on the move.
Donovan sifted through another box containing an array of firearms and medical supplies.
This place is closer to the hospital than the bar. He had to get the bleeding under control before going there for help.
Mercer didn't respond. He wanted Armin dead, but first he wanted answers, names, accomplices, and clients. That was his immediate goal. Let's retrace Armin's steps. Precisely where did he go after he left here? What path did he take? He must have an apartment close by under an alias. In his condition, he can't get far without being spotted, since his face is plastered across every news outlet in the city. And he's hurt. He'll need to hole up somewhere secure to mend.
What about you?
Donovan eyed Mercer's arm. The brawl only exacerbated the situation, and some of the stitches had ripped, leaving a darkening red spot on Mercer's sleeve. I'm functional. Leading the way out of the storage unit, Mercer picked up the phone and relayed the information to Bastian. As soon as they captured Armin, Bastian could analyze the information inside the storage unit, while the rest of his team protected Ben and Katia and questioned Armin about his accomplices. Sometimes I miss having the resources of the Crown. Donovan chuckled.
That makes one of us.
Night had fallen, and they wandered the streets, checking for signs of the hitman. A random red smear on the ground might lead straight to him. But once they followed Donovan's earlier path back to the pub, the trail went cold. Checking the side streets, Mercer cocked his head up, analyzing a nearby fire escape. He's smart. He has a place close by, somewhere to duck into if it gets too hot. Mercer scratched his chin. Some place with a vantage point to keep tabs on the bar. Donovan scanned the area, determining which perch provided the best view and cover. When he turned back around, Mercer was making his way to the building across the street. The commander crouched on the fourth-floor landing, studying the railing and signaling. Blood. Mercer pointed to a smear outside the window. He must have waited here to make sure we left.
He probably waited for the perfect shot. Unfortunately, we moved westward and he missed his opportunity.
Open it. Mercer stepped aside, letting Donovan lift the heavy double-paned glass. The window wasn't locked, and Donovan held it while Mercer slipped underneath. Once Mercer set foot in the apartment, he removed his handgun, holding it down at his side. He silently signaled to Donovan to check the back rooms, while he went right, toward the kitchen. Spread across the dirty linoleum was an unconscious heap. Mercer waited, not moving or even breathing. His focus split between Armin's prone form and the hallway Donovan entered. When the younger man returned, indicating it was clear, Mercer kicked Armin in the side, causing the contract killer to elicit a shriek. "I thought you said you wouldn't miss next time," Mercer taunted, yanking Armin by the collar and dragging him into the middle of the room, away from the cabinets and the few sharp medical instruments which had been used to remove the bullets and suture the gaping holes. "Seems you missed again. You really ought to consider lowering your fee."
"Mercer,"
Armin gasped, a faint gurgle rattling through his chest.
"Have you come to finish the job?"
He tried to smile, but it looked like a grimace.
"You didn't have the stones before. I doubt you grew a pair in such a short amount of time."
He gripped the side of his abdomen, where Mercer's bullets had ripped through his flesh.
"You had your chance twice. Was this really the best you could do?"
"Who do you work for?" Mercer saw red. His body tingled with a dark need to finish what he started. Flashes of the slaughtered police officers entered his mind, and he inhaled sharply, looking away.
"Who?"
He stomped his heel into the wound. Armin's yelp turned into a scream and then utter silence when he blacked out. Mercer stepped back, holstering the gun before he could shoot the guy. They needed answers. Retribution had to wait. But Mercer's entire body trembled with anger and torment. Fighting to control it, he thought he would explode any second.
"Jules?"
Donovan asked quietly. He had never seen Mercer so close to the edge before. "Make sure he's stable. We can't afford for him to die on us before he talks. I'll search the apartment in the meantime."
"Should I call—"
"I don't care what you do. Just get him healthy enough to answer our questions. Dying right now would be far too pleasant an experience for a piece of shit like him."
"Yes, sir."
Donovan set to work, while Mercer went to the back room. Sinking onto the bed, he put his face in his hands and took a few deep breaths, waiting for the tremors to stop. He never had a reaction like this to any job before. When he was in the military, he followed orders, carried out government-sanctioned hits, recoveries, and interrogations without batting an eye. Even the kidnapping cases he'd worked over the last 2 years never led to anything more than mild irritation and occasionally shooting some greedy, sadistic bastards. But this was different. Armin was a killer who performed hits for money and sport. There was no personal vendetta to support his gung-ho attitude to destroy Benjamin Styler. He tried and failed twice, and yet, even as he lay a bleeding, destroyed mess, he still had the audacity to gloat. This sick son of a bitch really thought he would get away with killing innocents scot-free. "Not again. Not another one," Mercer said, finding clues as to who Armin's partners were and who painted the target on Ben Styler's back were far more productive ways for Mercer to spend his time and energy. And at this particular moment, he had a lot of pent-up energy. "You will regret everything you've ever done," he muttered, ripping through the closet. Chapter 30. Armin was careful not to keep anything damning inside the apartment. Once Donovan performed some basic first aid to ward off infection and ensure the bleeding had stopped, he and Mercer moved the now sedated assassin to the warehouse where they were keeping John Welks. At this rate, Chicago would have a new prison, courtesy of Julian Mercer. They shackled Armin to a metal pipe, bound his legs and arms together behind his back, gagged and blindfolded him, and activated the jammer to prevent radio and cell signals from entering or leaving the warehouse. Isaac Armin wouldn't escape again. Once he was secured and the place was locked down, Mercer and Donovan returned to Armin's little home away from home. The apartment didn't lead to anything useful, but the same could not be said for the storage unit. Inside was enough evidence to put Armin behind bars for the rest of his natural life. Unfortunately, the identities of his two accomplices and the man who hired him to exterminate Benjamin Styler remained a mystery.
"He must have more of these units,"
Donovan said.
"What do you want me to do?"
"Trade out with Bastian. We'll let him muck around in case we've missed anything." Mercer drummed his fingers against one of the boxes. "It's all we can do." As soon as Donovan was gone, Mercer took a deep breath and opened another of the file boxes stacked in the corner. Armin kept records, but they were written in an indecipherable shorthand. Now that they had Armin locked down, they would eventually get answers out of him. But Mercer wasn't ready for that encounter. Donovan sedated Armin with a tranquilizer strong enough to knock him out for the next 12 hours. It was designed to give them time to search for answers and come up with better questions, or so Donovan said. However, Armin needed the reprieve, because, given the way he looked sprawled across the floor, it was unlikely he'd survive an interrogation at present, and they needed him to live long enough to give up a name. Mercer put the files back in the box.
"I thought we were meeting at the safe house,"
Bastian said, startling him. Opportunities presented themselves. Mercer spun to face his friend.
"Go back to the safe house. You wanted a 2-man team guarding Katia and Ben, and you need to sleep. You've been through the ringer."
Bastian jerked his chin toward the door.
"Go."
Mercer was losing the battle against his fatigue. How long had he been awake? 24 hours? Longer? So much had happened he couldn't think straight. We need to analyze the information. It's imperative I have leverage to use against Armin. He's going to be a tough nut to crack, and
you'll end up cracking open his skull. I'm well aware, not to mention the promises you made to Katia and Detective Rollins.
Bastian raised a challenging eyebrow.
I know what's at stake, and I know precisely what to do. Now go.
He jerked his chin at the open door of the storage unit.
Take my car. I'll have Hans pick me up later.
Relenting, Mercer took the car, executing numerous counter-surveillance measures and monitoring the mirrors and traffic patterns for all signs of a tail before returning to the safe house. Inside, Hans and Donovan were discussing Isaac Armin's condition and the evidence they'd found. Mercer ducked into the bathroom to shower and assess his condition. His shoulder burned and ached. The bruises and abrasions on his face and body were darker than they had been. He downed a few of the antibiotics, dressed his wounds, and returned to the kitchen.
"You should get some sleep,"
Hans said.
"Donovan went back to the warehouse to ensure our captives don't try anything. Bastian's hard at work, and I have this situation under control."
Nodding, Mercer sifted through the pile of supplies, slipped his arm back into the sling, and went down the hallway to the back bedroom. The sun had already come up, so he drew the drapes and climbed into bed. Propping himself against the headboard, he shut his eyes, letting the dull buzz of his headache combat the errant thoughts that entered his mind. The exhaustion set in, and he slipped deeper into the abyss.
"Mr. Mercer?"
A knock followed Katia's soft voice. She cracked the door open.
"May I come in?"
He opened his eyes and looked at her. Fine. His mind felt jumbled. He wasn't sure how long he'd been asleep, or even if he had enough time to fall asleep before her interruption. She shut the door behind her and sat on the edge of the bed.
"I just wanted to thank you."
"No need."
"Don't be modest."
She rubbed her forehead, studying the sling.
"Does it hurt?"
"It could be worse. What do you want?"
"I can't stop thinking about the hospital. Every time I close my eyes, I hear the shots in the hallway. I heard your friends talking about it."
She rested her hand on his leg.
"They said you found the shooter."
"Yes."
"What are you going to do to him?"
"Whatever is necessary to ensure your safety." Mercer narrowed his eyes at her hand, disliking such intimate contact. "Once he provides answers, I'll do what you asked."
"Thank you."
She cocked her head to the side.
"Your sling is tangled. That can't be comfortable. Let me fix it."
She got on her knees, reaching around his shoulders and straddling him in the process. With his mind still sluggish, he reacted instinctively when her fingers scraped against his bandaged arm by grabbing her wrist and yanking her arm upward and away. She fell forward, catching herself with her other hand, and coming to rest inches from him. "Sorry." He released her hand.
"I didn't mean to hurt you."
She sat upright.
"I just wanted to help."
"No need. Now, if you wouldn't mind getting off me." She blushed, suddenly realizing she was sitting on top of him.
"I'm such an idiot. I don't know why I do these things. Forget this ever happened." "Jules?"
Bastian entered the room to find Katia on Mercer's lap. He paused, casting a questioning glare from one to another.
"I didn't realize you were entertaining. When you're finished, I need to have a word with you."
"We're done," Mercer said. Katia flushed bright red and scurried past Bastian. Baz watched her duck back into the bedroom she was sharing with Ben.
"What do you think you're doing with that bird, mate? Her head's not screwed on straight. She's nuttier than a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I can't believe you."
Mercer rolled his eyes, too tired and aggravated to address the misguided assumption. "What's so important?"
"I've identified Isaac Armin's 2 associates."
Chapter 31. Isaac Armin hired Dean Manning and Keith Weston to provide a service. However, after extensive research, Bastian realized Manning and Weston were useless leads. Armin had taken an ad out in a few of the city's performing arts magazines, posted on various message boards and hung flyers near a few drama schools, for two men to fulfill the roles as extras in a new crime film. It was so stupid it actually worked. The men who answered the bill had to provide photos and general physical statistics to a post office box. Armin was looking to fill a type. He wanted men who resembled Jack Pierce's co-workers. Along with a strong physical resemblance, Armin found men who had a history of petty crimes. It explained how Katya's wallet and phone were lifted without her noticing. Dean Manning was the lowest level of con man. He ran 3-card Monte on street corners and had been arrested for panhandling. Weston had multiple run-ins with the authorities. He was a purse snatcher, pickpocket, and shoplifter. Neither man had a particularly grandiose criminal record, which made them the perfect candidates for Isaac Armin's new crime movie. Except it wasn't a movie, and now these two men were accomplices in an attempted homicide. Bastian found police and court records, but it was unlikely Manning or Weston knew anything about the hit. From what Bastian gathered, they showed up to play their parts and return to their lives. Mercer listened to the news, contemplating ramifications. "Where are they now?" Mercer hauled himself off the bed. He was achy and stiff, and he winced as he stretched, removing the sling and straightening his arm.
"Having a chat with the coppers. I passed the intel along to Rollins."
Bastian watched Mercer rotate his arm.
"What? The bird didn't work out your kinks?"
Mercer shot him a look on the way to the closet. "Did Rollins ask about the progress we've made?"
"He did, so I gave him the apartment where you found Armin and the storage unit."
Mercer grunted, clipping a handgun to his belt at the small of his back. "How are we supposed to get answers with those wankers mucking about?"
"Easy,"
Bastian smiled.
"I already gleaned the necessary information. The paper trail was practically useless. That gibberish Armin uses is a pain in the ass. But I took digital copies. Thank God for handheld scanners. Cheer up. The coppers can work their angles alongside our investigation. But that doesn't mean the streams will ever cross."
"Have you spoken to Armin, or followed up with Welks?"
"Just briefly."
Bastian let out a sigh and slumped onto the bed, rubbing his face. He was exhausted too.
"I don't see why this can't be simple, with a point A leading to point B, which gives us point C."
He leaned back against the pillows, but thought better of it.
"Should I find somewhere else to bunk down for a few hours? I don't want to deal with residual bodily fluids."
"Nothing happened, Baz. It was a miscommunication."
Sure.
Baz remained on top of the covers, shutting his eyes.
"Whatever you say."
Mercer let out a huff and left the room. Bastian's words only assured him that they still didn't know who orchestrated the hit. Remembering Roland's insistence on discovering means, motive, and opportunity, Mercer made a cup of tea and sipped it while examining every bit of the information they possessed. Starting at ground zero would be the best way to analyze the intel. Benjamin Styler was shot by Isaac Armin, who was accompanied by Dean Manning and Keith Weston. The two accomplices had no prior connection to Armin, Ben, or any of the other key players, and little involvement aside from tailing and pickpocketing the couple. However, these were the same two men who Welks photographed at Ben's apartment during the time of the alleged flower delivery. How long had this attempted assassination been in the works? If it had been weeks, as the evidence suggested, why was Armin so desperate to finish it in a single day after confronting Mercer inside the car? Letting out an uneasy breath, Mercer let his thoughts about Armin and the two actors simmer on the back burner, while he shifted his focus to whoever's deep pockets paid for the hit. Whoever hired Armin must have provided him with intimate details about Benjamin Styler. How else would the assassin have known to hire men who resembled Jack Pierce's co-workers? Was the plan to pin the murder on Jack, since he had the necessary resources and motive? Jack's visit to the bar near the scene of the shooting might even count as opportunity. It made for one bloody wicked frame-up job. Then, of course, there was the Carlton Road angle to consider. Carlton had been extorted and threatened by Ben. Carlton even went so far as to hire John Welks to investigate the source of the extortion. The money Welks received and later transferred to Piper Investigations traced back to the newspaper and the media mogul himself. But Mercer still couldn't decide how Carlton fit into any of this. Whoever orchestrated the hit worked at the paper, had access to Carlton's professional and private life, and possessed insight into Ben's past. Flashes of the man Mercer encountered outside Carlton's office came to mind. He re-examined the photographs they found inside Welk's house. Was it the same man Welks photographed making a deal with Armin? And since this man worked for Carlton, was he doing his boss's bidding when he hired the contract killer to eradicate Ben? I don't believe your father is involved, but do you think it's possible he knows who is? Mercer asked, not bothering to turn around.
How'd you know I was standing here?
Katia asked from the doorway. I smelled your perfume. Now answer the question.
I don't know. Dad warned me to leave Ben long before we even got engaged. He said Ben was trouble, and he said he was just using me. But Ben cleaned himself up and got his act together.
She pulled a chair out to sit.
Well, that was before I found out he took pictures of me and sent them to my father.
She sighed.
Do you believe my dad knows something he hasn't told us?
I'm not an investigator.
Now who's avoiding the questions?
Whatever's going on has been brewing for a while. I wouldn't discount the possibility Carlton has his own suspicions, but Jack Pierce is connected somehow, just like John Welks. Mercer pulled a few photos off the wall and put them on the table in front of her. No more lies. Write down everything you know about each of these men, and when you remember encountering them, even if it was only a fleeting glance. She started to protest, so he shoved a pen into her hand and left the room. This job was supposed to be protection and retribution, not some tedious investigation into such a baffling matter. After scouring the kitchen for food, Mercer prepared breakfast and tried to clear his mind. The answers were somewhere on that wall. He just needed to figure out how to access them. 30 minutes later, Ben came into the kitchen.
Good morning.
He eyed whatever concoction Mercer was wolfing down.
I heard you had a rough night. When did they let you leave the police station?
Why?
Just curious. You know, trying to make conversation. By the way, I'm sure I've already said it like 100 times, but thanks for pulling my bacon out of the fire. 2 close calls in less than a week. You'd think I was pure evil or worth billions. I owe you, man. If there's anything I can do, just say the word.
Good. Mercer continued to eat, but a thought gnawed its way through his brain. In the distance, he heard ringing, and Katia answering her phone. Not allowing for any distractions to derail his train of thought, he swallowed and wiped his mouth. What are you worth?
What?
You don't have a significant amount of family money. Your business sense and trading skills leave a lot to be desired. So what would anyone gain by killing you?
I don't know.
Ben turned, watching Katia enter the room with the cloned copy of her phone pressed to her ear.
What's wrong, babe?
My dad wants to talk to you.
She held the phone out. Mercer, he answered.
Return my daughter immediately,
Carlton bellowed.
I'm paying you to protect her. I am not paying you to protect her from me. You will bring her home immediately.
No.
Do you understand English? Bring her home now.
No.
This is kidnapping. I will report you. I'll find you. I'll send someone to stop you from filling her head with seeds of mistrust. They will come to collect her with or without your permission.
1, this is not a kidnapping. She chooses to be here. If she decides to leave, so be it. 2, who will you send? You can't afford to have your security team hospitalized. Carlton cleared his throat.
Don't try my patience, Mr. Mercer.
Then don't fuck with me. He handed the phone back to Katia. I'd suggest you don't answer the next time he calls.
But what are you doing?
She asked, flummoxed. Wordlessly, Mercer left the kitchen, snatching the list she made off the table before heading to the bedroom to wake Bastian. Chapter 32.
You do realize how insane that sounds, right?
Bastian asked. He was dressed in tactical gear, making sure he had at least 2 handguns loaded to be on the safe side.
Why would Carlton hire another team to protect Katia when that's precisely what our role is?
I don't know. Mercer replayed the conversation over in his head. All I'm saying is he wants Katia to come home.
Well, it's a good thing we're in an undisclosed location, and her cell is still at the police station. Whatever he tries won't get him very far. If he sends a team of bodyguards to fetch her, they'll come face to face with the coppers instead. At least those are slightly better odds than dealing with us.
Run through the information Katia gave us. Dissect every employee at Rhodes Paper. Track the numbers. Follow the money. Do whatever it is you have to in order to get me the name of the man responsible. In the meantime, I've sent for Donovan. As soon as he arrives, I will speak to Armin and Welks.
Are you sure that's a good idea?
It's bloody brilliant.
I doubt that.
Bastian studied the sheet of paper. He already had some strong leads, but figuring this out would take a bit of patience and some luck. Mercer had neither of those things, so Bastian returned to their makeshift op center, flipped open a laptop, and set to work, chewing on the end of a pen.
Hey, do you have a minute?
He called. Mercer remained in the kitchen with Ben, while Katia went to see what Bastian wanted. Once the two men were alone, Mercer narrowed his eyes at the kid. They had been in the middle of a conversation before the phone call, and Mercer still had questions that needed answering. His silent, unwavering gaze made Ben uneasy, causing the younger man to gulp a few times and rub absently at the bandage on his chest.
What?
Ben asked when he couldn't take the silence any more. Why would someone want to kill you?
I told you I don't know.
Think.
I don't have much. My parents don't either. We're comfortable, but not millionaires. Everything I have would go to Katia anyway. I told you that before. But really, you can't seriously believe she wants me dead. She wouldn't be here if she did.
What about your mate, Jack?
I already told you he wouldn't do this. Well, it would be understandable, but he's not the physically violent type. He's nothing like you.
Ben blurted out, realizing his mistake immediately, and slapping a palm over his mouth, reddening.
No offense.
That was far from offensive. Mercer leaned back, picking up the cold tea and taking one final sip. Isaac Armin and John Welks had Jack Pierce and his associates under surveillance. Do you and Jack have any common enemies?
Not that I can think of.
Mercer squinted, considering the facts and information from Armin's storage unit. Does Carlton Road have any connection with Pierce's company?
I don't think so, unless he published a story in the business section or included Pierce Industries as part of the expose series he ran about harmful business practices. I can't remember. He published quite a few scathing stories.
What was Carlton exposing?
Companies paying off waste management to look the other way when they incorrectly disposed of chemicals. Tycoons making under-the-table deals with competitors to keep prices artificially inflated.
Ben paused, lost in thought.
Some local government guy, the mayor or a member of a city council, being paid under the table to vote a certain way or pass a certain law or restriction. I don't really know. It sounded like the same kind of shit that happens every day, and none of that really interests me.
Shouldn't business deals be your priority?
I guess, but I don't really worry much with local trends or companies. You remember how great that worked out when I invested in Jack's company.
If you survive this mess, I suggest you find a new line of work. Mercer stalked the confines of the apartment, impatient to take a crack at Isaac Armin. It was unlikely Armin would remain breathing much longer, and given his pallor and the condition they found him in, he might die from infection or blood loss without Mercer squeezing a name out of him, although there was still a part of Julian that wanted to draw out the pain and torment. His mind focused on Katia crying hysterically into his shirt. He knew that type of anguish, and since he had yet to find justice for his wife, he wanted it for Katia.
"Jules!"
Donovan said, entering the safe house to find Mercer's spare cig shoved in his face.
"I come in peace."
After Mercer lowered the gun, Donovan explained the lack of progress that had been made with the captives. Welks had slept through the night after answering as many questions as he could, but his answers were vague. Armin, on the other hand, remained sedated, occasionally slipping in and out of consciousness, but never long enough to provide answers.
"It won't last long without medical intervention."
Fine.
Don't you find it the least bit ironic that we're kidnapping resolution specialists, but we've committed 2 kidnappings in the past week?
I don't think of them as kidnappings. We aren't looking for ransom or airing a list of demands. Mercer collected a set of keys and slipped into his jacket.
So what are we doing?
Donovan would follow orders, but he was having trouble stomaching the torture they were inflicting. Kill a man and be done with it. That was his philosophy, which explained his preference for long-range military tactics. This is a rendition.
We're not dealing with terrorist cells. This isn't Chechnya or the Middle East.
Mercer failed to agree and continued on his way. When he arrived at the makeshift prison, he parked the car and studied the surrounding area. He had learned quite a bit over the last 36 hours and was determined to put an end to this today. Checking his gun, he chambered around and removed the magazine. It would be 1 bullet or none at all. Despite the tactical stupidity of such a move, he didn't believe Isaac Armin was in any condition to screw around. 1 bullet, that was it. It was all he needed, and the only thing separating what was left of his fractured soul from the demons he barely kept at bay. Entering the office space that housed the private investigator, Mercer grabbed the back of Welk's chair and dragged him out of the office and into the main room of the warehouse. From here, Welks could see Armin, but unless either man spoke loudly, their words would not be overheard. Mercer came to stand directly in front of Welks, looking down at him. "Speak," Mercer commanded.
"What more can you possibly want from me? I've answered your questions. Let's be done with this."
Welks had soiled himself over the last few days on account of his incarceration. He was dirty, exhausted, and starving. He was a broken man. "Do you recognize him?" Mercer jerked his chin across the room, and Welks nodded. "Is he the reason you've been too scared to answer my questions?" Welks remained silent, looking away. "Do you want that to happen to you?"
"You're going to do it anyway."
Welks had given up. Perhaps the ex-SAS had broken him beyond where they intended. "I give you my word. If you answer my questions, I'll let you go. I'll arrange for you and your family to be protected. Just tell me what I want to know. That piece of filth is a killer. But so is whoever hired him. It's the same person who hired you."
"I don't know who he is,"
Welks declared on the brink of tears. He sniffed and shook his head, forcing neutrality to return. He might be broken, but he fought to hold on to as much of his dignity as he could.
"I've said it before, but I'll tell you again. I received an anonymous email. Payments were transferred into my account. I moved them into Piper Investigations. I don't know who wanted the information on Rode and his family."
"How did you report back to this unknown source?" Mercer asked. He believed Welks, finally, but Bastian found no electronic trail for Welks's follow-up communiques to this mysterious benefactor.
"A dead drop. It was near a coffee cart on the East End."
Welks gave him the address.
"I discovered whoever hired me also hired Isaac Armin. The hitman's reputation is well known in the circles I travel. Hazard of being a PI, I suppose. After that, I tried to walk away, to stop delivering additional intel, but I couldn't. I was afraid. My email contact asked for photographs of Ben Styler, and in my travels, I happened to photograph a meet between him,"
Welks jerked his head towards Armin,
"and someone else. I hoped to use it as an insurance policy to keep my wife and me safe, in case someone tried to eliminate me too."
"Did you tell Carlton Road what you had done?"
"Not in so many words. I began keeping tabs on him and Katia, figuring I could intervene and correct my mistake. But Carlton grew suspicious. He called me into his office at the newspaper to ask what was going on. I said I believed he and Katia might be in danger."
Welks swallowed.
"He thanked me and said it would be taken care of, but I still kept watch, keeping my ear to the ground for rumblings of an impending hit. That's why Carlton hired his own team to deal with the danger.
Welks met Mercer's eyes.
You're going to kill me now, aren't you?
No. Dragging the chair and Welks back into the office, Mercer shut the door. When the police arrived, they would search the warehouse and discover the private investigator. Hopefully they would protect him and his wife in the event Mercer hadn't resolved the issue by then. Closing the door against Welks's undignified, screeching pleas for freedom or death, Mercer composed himself and strolled across the expanse to Isaac Armand's prone form. He towered over the killer for hire, but the man merely stared up at him, his blue eyes hard and cold. Despite the layer of perspiration covering his face, a sure sign infection had set in, he didn't flinch. "Why do you refuse to cooperate?" Mercer asked. "Shall I offer you the same consolation you gave me? Because I don't think you deserve quick or painless."
"It's just a job."
Mercer ground his teeth, tilting his head from side to side as he worked out an imaginary kink. "Tell me who hired you."
"I'm not sharing my client list. That's the last thing I need, is some other former military hack setting up shop. I asked you to leave nicely. That was your only chance."
"And yet you're the one deteriorating from a gunshot wound. Care to reconsider?" Mercer's voice remained even, and he forced his breathing and pulse to remain steady. This was only a conversation. Armand let out a wheezing chuckle and spat on Mercer's shoe.
"Fuck off."
"You're sloppy. You pretend to be methodical, but you couldn't even make yourself appear professional without hiring 2 actors to accompany you on the shooting. Did you need them to hold your hand?" Armand let out a huff. "Twice you failed to eliminate your target. Obviously you were asked to do more than provide a clean kill. What's your secondary agenda? Elaborate, and we'll discuss whether you have a future." Mercer wasn't one for words, but years of negotiations did come with a few benefits.
"Follow the fucking breadcrumbs and figure it out yourself."
Armand yanked his bound arms and legs so he could roll onto his side. He struggled to get to his knees, the only other position the restraints allowed besides flat on the floor.
"There isn't a single reason why I should tell you anything."
Mercer was smart enough to realize Armand wanted to negotiate. "What will it be? Medical attention, money, drugs?" The ire seeped into his vocal pattern, and he forced it down. "A bloody commendation for a job well done? Is that what you want, soldier?"
"Benjamin Styler's dead?"
"How could he be? You didn't even make it into his hospital room." Mercer watched a grin erupt on his captive's face. "Who else is in play?" Armand remained kneeling, a sick grin on his face. "You failed. You won't get another chance. So tell me who hired you."
"I want a fair chance to escape."
The contract killer trembled from the exertion of holding himself up. The wound oozed blood, and from the smell, pus, too. "Fine. Tell me who hired you. I'll remove the restraints, and if you make it out alive, so be it." Armand looked skeptically up at Mercer.
"You expect me to believe that?"
"I give you my word."
"Aren't you the honorable one?"
Mercer remained silent. The only sign of his displeasure was in the clenching of his fists.
"Fine. Untie me first,"
Armand said. Mercer assessed him for a long moment. Armand no longer posed a danger. He was hanging on to consciousness with nothing more than stubbornness. "If you try anything, you will regret it." Mercer unhooked the numerous locks that held the restraints around the warehouse piping, taking his time, wary of every shift and sound Armand made. Once the killer was free, Mercer stepped back. "Give me his name."
"Daniel Pierce. Now, run along and play. Maybe you can reap some fringe benefits by consoling that piece of ass that's been at Styler's side this whole time. She seems pretty good on her knees, and she'll need a shoulder to cry on when Styler's no longer in the picture."
He winked.
"You're welcome."
Mercer didn't hesitate. He pulled his weapon and shot Armin in the knee. The move was calculated. A blown-out kneecap was excruciating and would never heal properly. In the event Armin survived, every day from here on out would be a reminder that he screwed with the wrong man. Furthermore, the thought of this broken man dragging himself through a pool of his own blood to cross the dirty warehouse floor would satisfy the promise Mercer had made to Katya. Not to mention, it would greatly impede any chance of Armin escaping. Armin howled in pain.
"You lying bastard! You're no better than me!"
Mercer saw red. Unable to do anything but give in to the bloodlust, he braced his palms against the back wall, stomping and kicking the living daylights out of Armin. When Mercer's vision cleared and his internal rage was back in check, he stepped away, lifting the phone and dialing Detective Rawlins. Armin groaned, curling in on himself. He reached a hand toward Mercer, who took a step back.
"You'll regret this,"
Armin wheezed, clutching his side. "Detective, I suggest you send a team to collect the rubbish." Mercer provided the address and walked out of the warehouse. That murderous swine has been dealt with. Chapter 33. "Mr. Pierce, we need to have another chat." Mercer moved behind Jack Pierce and blocked the door. "Where's your brother?" Jack turned, startled. Flecks of dried blood covered Julian's clothing from the middle of his chest all the way to his shoes. Jack took a few steps backward, intent on reaching his desk phone and calling for help. Mercer remained still, watching as Jack lifted the receiver and heard nothing but silence. "I disconnected your phone and computer. Your secretary was told to take a long lunch. Building security is occupied with an unrelated issue on another floor. A small fire broke out. It appears to be electrical in nature." Mercer continued. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just tell me where your brother is." "What do you want with Daniel?" "Answers." Jack sucked on his bottom lip, considering his options for escape or the chances of fighting off Mercer. Jack possessed a valiant streak, but he wasn't stupid enough to think he'd win in a fight. "The last I heard, he was working for a newspaper. This building has plenty of security. I've filed a police report. If anything happens to me, they'll find out who you are and what you did." Mercer placed a business card on the desk between him and Jack. "That ought to make it easier for them. However, I'm here to help you. Your brother is seeking revenge. You stole his seat on the board and the favored position with your father." "Dad doesn't play favorites." "No, so it's just an ugly rumor that he disowned Daniel and crowned you heir apparent?" "I had nothing to do with that. I didn't ask for any of this." Jack gestured around the room. "After my investments started to turn a profit, I pitched a fantastic business plan for the coming year and was promoted. There was no favoritism involved." "Except, until that time, you were shunned because of your childish antics with Benjamin Styler and your poor investment skills. Your brother stood to gain everything." "What does any of this have to do with Ben?" "Daniel hired a hitman to eliminate Ben and hoped to frame either you or Carlton Road for the murder." "Why would my own brother do something like that?" Mercer gave him a look. "Asked and answered. We're not Cain and Abel." "Fine." Mercer stepped toward the door. "But now you are aware of the situation. I suggest you take measures to protect yourself. This is about revenge. Warn your father and anyone you care about. Your brother is not to be taken lightly." With those ominous final words, Mercer walked out of Jack Pierce's corner office. There was only one other location Mercer could think to visit. He had yet to phone Bastian to fill him in on these new developments, and frankly, he didn't want to. He was sick of his friend acting as his conscience. It was demeaning and unnecessary. Mercer was a big boy. He could handle matters on his own. even if there would be some disagreement amongst his team concerning the tactics he employed against Isaac Arman. However, no one could argue that the ends didn't justify the means. And honestly, wasn't that the only thing that mattered? Pulling up to the curb, Mercer left his vehicle illegally parked and strode into the newspaper building. Mercer ignored the row of receptionists and headed straight for the elevator. Before he made it there, security stopped him. Based upon their dark suits and earpieces, Mercer wagered they were members of Carlton's personal team instead of the normal rent-a-cops that provided building security. "Mr. Mercer," one of them said, "Mr. Road would like a word." "As would I." Mercer's gaze flicked to one of the cameras in the corner. "But first, I would like to know the whereabouts of Daniel Pierce." The bodyguard remained silent, but another 4 men joined the ranks, crowding Mercer from all sides and escorting him into the elevator. Mercer's gaze shifted around the tiny metal box. It was close quarters, but he could probably subdue these clowns. Then again, this wasn't about Carlton's accusations concerning his treatment of Katya. This was about completing the mission. After all, Carlton hired Mercer and his team to identify the party responsible for the near-fatal shooting and protect Katya, regardless of the cost. And Mercer's team had done both of those things. It wasn't his fault Carlton got antsy and tried to change the play after the game had commenced. The elevator doors opened, and Mercer was led down the hallway by the entourage of dark suits. Carlton's personal assistant looked up from her desk. She nodded to the men, offered a small smile to the one on the left, and gestured toward the open office door.
"Mr. Road will see you now,"
she said in a professional tone, as if Mercer had requested a meeting through formal business channels. The men in suits remained in the reception area, and Mercer glanced back at them.
"Right inside,"
she said, returning her attention to the computer.
"Close the door,"
Carlton ordered. He kept his back to Mercer as he stared out the large window. As soon as the door clicked closed, he spun, no longer exhibiting the posture or demeanor of a business professional.
"Where is my daughter?"
"She's safe."
"You will return her immediately."
"I was hired to protect her."
"Not from me. We will not have this conversation again. You will either have someone bring her to this office, or I will have you arrested, interrogated, and thrown in jail until you change your mind."
"We don't have time for this. The man responsible for nearly killing Katya's fiancée works here. For you. And if I'm not mistaken, we even brushed up against one another the last time I was here."
"What are you talking about?"
Mercer took a seat in the client chair across from Carlton's desk. "You hired John Welks to investigate the source of the extortion. He discovered who sent the photos, and for a while, I believed you hired Isaac Arman to kill Benjamin Styler because of it."
"I would never,"
Carlton protested, but Mercer held up a hand. "You would. I don't doubt that. But the pieces didn't add up. I'm sure you were hoping Ben would die or disappear, but your methods to drive a wedge between him and your daughter have backfired. Having Katya under your roof is what led to their semi-public trysts, and it gave the actual killer the perfect opportunity to act. You're lucky he was only hired to kill Ben, or else it would already be too late." Carlton slumped into his executive chair.
"Who's responsible?"
"According to the assassin, he was hired by Daniel Pierce," Mercer said, watching Carlton's eyes widen in disbelief. "Where is he?"
"He should be in his office. After the shooting at the hospital, he offered his condolences and assured me that Katya would be fine. I never imagined Daniel would do something like this. Are you sure you have the right guy?"
Standing abruptly, Mercer went to the door. "Call off the team you hired to procure Katya. I gave you my word I would protect her, and I've done precisely that. As soon as I get my hands on Daniel Pierce, this will be over." Halfway out the door, he called over his shoulder, "You should call the police now." Bursting inside Daniel's office, Mercer was confronted with nothing but empty space. The security guards monitored his movements as he sifted through the contents on top of the desk and in the drawers. Not finding anything telling, he proceeded into the hallway. "Shall we detain him?" a guard asked as Carlton turned the corner.
No! Carlton met Mercer's eyes. Mr. Mercer's doing what I hired him to do.
He studied Mercer for a few seconds longer.
I called them.
He looked around the room.
Where's Daniel?
I suggest you find out. Carlton snatched a radio from one of the security guards and barked a few questions into it. After a couple of staticky bursts, he handed back the radio, his face ashen.
According to the front desk, he left right after our morning meeting and hasn't been back since. But the police are on the way.
I won't be here when they arrive, but my team will be in touch. We'll need access to Daniel's workspace. Mercer headed to the elevator, pressing the down button. Chapter 34.
Bloody hell!
Bastian cursed.
How long was Daniel planning this?
Since Carlton Road hired Welks to investigate the extortion, the private eye got himself in too deep,
Hans said. He had spent the most time with their first captive, but the man hadn't offered much.
The gumshoe was smart enough to know whoever wanted to ice Ben could just as easily turn on his inside man.
It explains why the funding came from the newspaper and how the emails were sent internally,
Bastian said.
What's become of the private eye?
Donovan asked Mercer. I assume the police handled the situation. It doesn't matter. Daniel Pierce is responsible. We find him and we kill him, Mercer said resolutely.
Or we turn him over to the authorities and let them deal with him,
Bastian corrected.
Don't you think you've done enough damage today?
His eyes drifted to the flecks of blood dotting Mercer's clothing.
Go get changed before we contract hepatitis. Or worse.
Donovan, make sure Pierce hasn't hired anyone else to carry out the killing. You've made enough contacts with the local private military contractors, so I don't imagine this task will be too difficult, Mercer said.
Aye.
Hans, collect as much information as you can from all the pertinent locations and players. Baz will tell you what he needs, Mercer said, passing off the command position and excusing himself.
Baz needs you to stop behaving like a bull in a china shop,
Bastian yelled, referencing himself in the third person and hoping Mercer's departing back would take his words to heart. Once Mercer left the room, Katya intercepted his retreat, pulling him into the bedroom.
Don't worry, I'll respect your personal space this time.
She looked downright giddy.
I heard part of your discussion. You found the shooter?
Yes. She looked up at him with her big blue eyes.
You made sure he paid for what he did.
She dabbed at the tears that threatened to fall. They weren't tears of sadness or pain. They were the physical expression of her rage. I kept my word.
Thank you.
She looked relieved and let out a sigh. Standing on her tiptoes, she gave him a quick peck on the cheek and returned to the kitchen. Birds. Mercer grabbed a change of clothes and headed for the shower to wash the remnants of Isaac Arman from his body. When he returned, freshly showered and dressed in something not covered in blood spatter, Bastian slid a dossier across the desk. Only the four of them remained in the safe house. Hans and Donovan had left to run errands.
Sit down. We need to talk,
Bastian said. Mercer took a seat and flipped through the file on Daniel Pierce. It contained intel on the entire Pierce family, their business, associates, and relationship to Benjamin Styler and the Rhodes.
Detective Rowland's called.
Bastian leaned back in the chair and picked up a handful of pretzels.
I'm surprised you didn't kill Arman, but you let me believe that you did. Why?
There was a good chance he was dead. Really, what was the point of checking? He either was or wasn't. It was no longer my concern. Bastian rubbed a free hand down his face.
Fine, but I don't believe you.
The uncomfortable silence lingered a moment more.
Welks is at the hospital. His wife is with him. Rowlands has convinced them to enter into protective custody. It seems the private investigator has plenty to say that corroborates what we've already found. The police have enough evidence to build a strong case against Arman and Daniel Pierce.
Excellent.
We can stop now, Jules. The CPD will arrest Daniel as soon as they spot him.
And you think someone who went to such great pains to avoid detection up until this point will be located that easily?
The job is over. You determined the identity of the assassin and the man who hired him. The only thing left to do is provide Katia with protection until Daniel is apprehended. Rowlands has assured me it shouldn't take long. They are maintaining eyes on his brother Jack, their family's office building, Carlton's newspaper, and Carlton himself. Daniel will surface. I'm sure of it.
Maybe. Mercer picked up the dossier and left the room. Bastian was right. Their job was nearly complete. A couple more hours or days of bodyguard work, and this would be resolved. But Mercer had issues separating his personal stake in the matter. After all, Armin had attempted to kill Mercer twice and taunted him repeatedly, and that wasn't very nice. "Let me know what Donovan and Hans find," Mercer yelled from the next room.
Fine.
Bastian knew Mercer wouldn't reconsider. The commander wanted to resolve this, so they would. Settling into the living room, Mercer read the file on Daniel Pierce. Maybe if they had explored this avenue earlier, those 3 police officers would still be alive. Ben and Katia wouldn't have been further traumatized, and Mercer wouldn't have been grazed by a bullet or had to deal with the annoyance of a dislocated shoulder. At least they were on track now. Daniel Pierce was 4 years older than Jack. After graduating with an MBA from one of the world's most prestigious business schools, Daniel went to work at his father's company. Within a few months, he was made head of advertising. But he wasn't trained for such a position. Marketing wasn't his forte. To gain further insight into that industry, he went on sabbatical at his father's insistence and interned at a few advertising agencies, magazines, and newspapers. His last stint landed him at Carlton Road's newspaper. The newspaper didn't offer much insight into a business's marketing strategy, but it earned Daniel plenty of contacts at the big publishers and access to reporters at the major media outlets. This ensured plenty of positive press for Pierce Industries and the ability to squash any negative stories that might surface. However, Daniel was unlucky enough to be employed by Carlton Road at the worst possible time. Carlton was running a series of exposés concerning government and business corruption. One of the stories focused on Pierce Industries. When Daniel failed to convince Carlton to drop the story, Daniel's father blamed him. After the internship ended, there was no position left at Pierce Industries for Daniel. The tides had turned. Daniel was no longer the fair-haired child, and since Jack had ended his friendship with Benjamin Styler and his investment portfolio had turned around, Pierce Industries gave Jack a top spot at the company, and Daniel was left out in the cold. Carlton Road, despite his conniving and ruthless tactics, had a soft spot for Daniel and hired him as a business executive. Daniel's fancy education and newly acquired marketing knowledge made him a great asset and quickly earned him a spot as Carlton's right-hand man. But Daniel held a grudge against his brother and father and decided to do something about it. After reading the narrative of Daniel's business life and filling in a lot of the blanks with conjecture, Mercer returned to find Bastian scanning the city's surveillance system. Mercer studied the camera feed, noting the special interest Baz had taken in the Pierce Industries building and Jack's apartment building. "Any other targets?" Mercer asked.
I'd say his father, but the man is out of the country on business. Ben and Katia are here. If he wanted to put an end to Carlton Road, he would have done so at the office.
Baz shifted his focus from the screens.
It's pretty fucked up that Carlton just let him walk out that door. This is the man that nearly killed his daughter.
Maybe Carlton feels responsible.
Still, it seems strange. He was ready to send a team to eliminate us if we didn't return Katia. Why wouldn't he do the same to Daniel?
Are we certain he hasn't?
I'll have Donovan check, and I'll notify our detective friend.
Bastian picked up the phone.
Carlton strikes me as the impatient type. Worse than you. So, if he has any mercenaries on speed dial, I'm sure they're already in play.
Chapter 35.
Maybe I should call Jack,
Ben mused. He and Katia were getting stir-crazy.
I'm sure he could use some moral support now that we know his brother is a psychopath.
Mercer gave him a hard look, and Ben clamped his mouth shut. The longer they were stuck inside the safe house, the more fervently Mercer wanted to take action. But he insisted 2 members of the team act as guards in the event of a worst-case scenario. So he was stuck babysitting Ben and Katya. But as the hours ticked by and day turned into night and back to day, he wanted nothing more than to pound the pavement. Donovan's search was fruitless. As far as they knew, no one had been hired to replace Isaac Armin. The hitman remained under heavy guard and in a medically induced coma due to the severe infection and injuries sustained. It was unlikely he'd survive the night. Luckily, the 2 actors Armin hired had been located by the police. The 2 crooks turned actors poured their guts out in hopes of avoiding criminal charges. After being hired, Manning and Weston were told they would be playing gangsters in a noir crime film. The men were given suits to wear and told to lurk about. The day they visited Ben Styler's apartment building was the day Armin originally planned the assassination, but they missed Ben by a matter of minutes. Believing it was a script, they had entered his unlocked apartment, checked for the camera crew and others, and left confused. Armin told them the scene had been rewritten because the actor hired to play the victim was called away on an unexpected emergency, and the 2 never called this into question. Even after the shooting in the alley, they still believed it was just part of the film. Despite their helpfulness in providing testimony against Isaac Armin, the 2 actors had never heard the name Daniel Pierce, nor could they identify his photo from the pictures the police showed them. Daniel had made sure he insulated himself from the crime in order to paint someone else as the guilty party. And while most of the evidence pointed toward Carlton Road, the question on everyone's mind was why did Armin hire 2 actors who resembled Jack Pierce's co-workers? The only man who could answer that question was Daniel Pierce. The CPD was still searching for him. His credit card activity and normal haunts were under heavy scrutiny, but the man had vanished into a puff of smoke. "Anything, Hans?" Mercer asked as the younger man returned from his outing, carrying stacks of information and hard drives.
Tons of feed to be scrubbed.
Hans dropped the files and drives onto the desk beside Bastian.
I also asked the detective to pull the police records for Dean Manning and Keith Weston, the entire police file on the current shooting investigation, a copy of his personal notes, and the little things that never became official.
He glanced back at Mercer.
Sometimes the coppers aren't a bad lot.
"Right," Mercer replied, picking up the detective's personal set of notes and skimming the chicken scratch. The police conducted a follow-up with Daniel's co-workers, but they don't know anything about the hit.
"Daniel still has access to the Pierce Industries building,"
Baz said, already loading data into one of the computers.
"It looks like he accessed the employee database and determined who worked closely with his brother. Then he found the lookalikes to make the frame-up appear even more convincing, as if the falling out between Jack and Ben hadn't been convincing enough."
Cold-blooded bastard.
Hans stifled a yawn.
"I'm knackered."
"Take some downtime," Mercer instructed. "It'll be a while before we determine Daniel's current location."
"Did the police have a conversation with Jack about his brother?"
Bastian asked, wondering if Mercer had come across the information yet. "I don't know. You spoke to Rollins. What did he say?"
"Not much. He's been too busy keeping our descriptions and involvement out of this mess. Shit, you've been locked up 3 times. The rest of the police department thinks you're in cahoots with the killer. So be thankful someone is on your side."
"It isn't the first time I've been blamed. Tell Rollins to do his job and stop covering my ass. I can take care of myself." They spent the rest of the day analyzing the data. Daniel Pierce had enough access to his father's company and Carlton's newspaper to plant evidence against Jack Pierce and Carlton Road. As far as Bastian could tell, Daniel hoped to implicate both men. But why? If Daniel wanted to discredit his brother's character, having him accused of murder seemed like a great way to do it. So why did he also frame Carlton? Sure, Carlton had motive and means, but something was missing. Around midnight, the computer let out a warning beep. Bastian swiveled in his chair, focusing on the surveillance feed outside Jack Pierce's apartment building. Daniel entered through the side door, usually reserved for building maintenance and deliveries. The police had a few units on site, but Mercer didn't trust them to make the best decisions. They hadn't so far, and he couldn't be certain they were paying attention now.
"Jules, wait!"
Bastian called, but Mercer was already out the door. Sighing, Bastian dialed Rawlins, relayed the information and the commander's ETA, and woke Hans and Donovan.
"Be on alert here. I'm going after Julian."
As Mercer neared the apartment building, he noted the dozen unmarked police vehicles creating a perimeter around the area. The side streets and main thoroughfare were blocked off, angering the city's occupants who had to reroute. Slamming the car to a stop and blocking half of a dead-end alley, Mercer went around to the back and strapped on the Kevlar. He checked his gun, stowed an extra magazine in his pocket, and zipped his jacket over his new ensemble. Then he hoofed it the next 3 blocks to the apartment building. "Detective Rawlins?" Mercer greeted. "What's the situation?"
"We don't know."
Rawlins made a face.
"A man matching Daniel Pierce's description was seen entering the side door, but no one can verify it's him. We've contacted Jack, but he says he got in late and went in the side. There hasn't been so much as a peep from building security or any 911 calls to report a disturbance. We don't want to tip Daniel off if he's not there."
Moppets. Mercer took a step forward, intent on entering the building and resolving the issue, but Rawlins grabbed him by the collar.
"Not so fast. What do you think you're doing?"
"I'm a professional negotiator. Daniel Pierce is inside, and if he isn't, the dozen unmarked cars rerouting traffic and the plainclothes officers talking into their sleeves have already tipped him off. Either way, you've been made. Now are you going to handle this, or should I?" Rawlins considered his options. From the grim expression on his face, he agreed with Mercer's assessment.
"My hands are tied by the white shirts. Good luck."
Luck has nothing to do with it. Squaring his shoulders, Mercer took a final deep breath, stretched his sore arm, and continued to the side of the building. If Daniel found an alternative method of entry besides the doorman in the lobby, Mercer could do the same. He went around the side, finding a metal box requiring a 4-digit passcode. After giving the door a quick tug, he pulled out his phone and dialed Hans. "Pass me to Ben," he instructed, and once he heard Ben's uncertain hello, he asked, "What's the code to get into Jack's apartment building?"
2163,
Ben replied, hearing an unfriendly click echo in his ear. Mercer entered the code and watched the button turn from red to green. He tugged, and the door opened. He stepped inside. The side door led down a narrow hallway that split in 3 different directions. One path led to the lobby, the other to the basement, and the third to a staircase. Mercer took the stairs up to Jack's floor and exited quietly. He spotted a man and woman sharing an intimate moment, but the rest of the floor was empty. He passed the couple and continued to Jack's apartment. Examining the door, Mercer found no signs of forced entry, but it was possible Daniel possessed a key. They were brothers, and oftentimes family could gain access, even when they shouldn't be able to. It explained why so many of the kidnappings Mercer had seen revolved around one parent taking a child from the other. Mercer shook the wayward commentary aside, refocusing on the matter at hand. He waited half a minute, debating if he should go in loud. His presence would be immediately known, but he would also have the element of surprise. He took a step back and kicked the door just above the knob. The frame splintered and the door popped open. Luckily, no one was bothered to lock the deadbolt. He entered the room swiftly, his gun poised in front of him. The apartment wasn't incredibly large, but Mercer didn't have time to perform a proper sweep before 2 men emerged from a side room. Daniel Pierce held Jack at gunpoint, waving him forward with the muzzle of his gun.
"Julian Mercer, it's a pleasure to finally meet you,"
Daniel said.
You've definitely made this more difficult than it had to be, but regardless, I salute you, sir. Your reputation doesn't do you justice. And now, the final piece has fallen into place.
Chapter 36. Drop it! Mercer aimed at Daniel's head, but Daniel grabbed Jack and pulled him backward for protection. Don't be stupid. Let's calm down. Daniel swayed slightly, keeping a firm grip on Jack.
Your appearance this evening, Julian, is precisely what I was counting on. You see, after Isaac failed the first time, I had to reassess the situation. A botched attempt didn't fit into my plans, and he was supposedly the best in the business, or at least the best in the area. It's a shame money couldn't buy exactly what I needed.
Then you should have done it yourself.
Probably. But how could I pin it on someone else?
Daniel shook his head.
No, it was supposed to be simple. The day after the shooting, Carlton should have come to work outwardly distraught, but utterly relieved that Benjamin Styler was dead. It was one less mooch for him to worry about, and that would mean his daughter stood to inherit everything.
You wanted to kill Ben so some chick could keep her inheritance?
Jack asked.
No, little brother, you're so naive. Ben was granted legal privileges to Katia's accounts. It was some arrogant show of trust and a slap in the face to her father, who wanted them to sign a prenup. It would have added to Carlton's motive.
Were you planning to seduce her after you murdered my best friend?
Jack asked, and Mercer realized Jack was asking questions to buy time and distract Daniel. With any luck, Daniel would forget to remain in motion, and Mercer could take the shot. Daniel laughed, a low, bitter sound.
Idiot! I can't believe Dad lets you run his company. You have no imagination or ingenuity. If it weren't for me, you would have continued making bad investments. I gave you those stock tips and some insider trading information, but you couldn't even stand up for me when I was thrown out of the company.
Daniel edged toward the wall, slamming Jack into it, causing a river of blood to run down his face. You wanted the authorities to think Carlton hired Isaac Arman to eliminate Ben because of the blackmail, Mercer said, distracting Daniel before he could clock Jack with the gun.
Bingo! At least someone else in this room has 2 functioning brain cells.
Daniel made a contented noise.
Then again, if you had thought ahead, you would have figured out my endgame, and not stepped right into the perfect trap.
Oh, yeah? Mercer asked, slowly circling. Why don't you share it while you can still speak?
The evidence points to Carlton. First, the private investigator discovered Ben Styler blackmailed his future father-in-law, and the communications and money that went to the PI filtered through Rhodes' newspaper. There's an easy paper trail for the authorities to follow. Carlton even took a meeting near the dead drop that I established for Welks. It was damn near perfect,
Daniel boasted.
And you were just the icing on the cake.
Explain, Mercer said, noticing movement in the periphery.
You were another pawn in Carlton's game, and you were led by the nose into believing Jack was responsible. Hell, Jackie's 2 co-workers were practically accomplices at the time of the shooting. So, it looks like Carlton convinced you Jack wanted to kill Ben, and therefore, you should kill Jack.
Daniel smiled.
You threatened my little brother. It was caught on the security feed. He even filed a police report against you. But then, you threatened him at work, and finally, you came to his house to finish the job. You see, everything traces back to you, Mr. Mercer. You discovered John Welks was the mole. You took him captive, ransacked his apartment, and practically beat Isaac Arman to death. Your actions make their testimony suspect if they were to talk. But I don't think they will. Welks would be too afraid, and Arman is too proud, assuming he survives. There is enough circumstantial evidence and hints of impropriety circling to discredit anything you might say.
No one could have predicted I'd stumble upon the botched murder attempt, or that Carlton would hire me, Mercer narrowed his eyes. Even you aren't that brilliant.
Maybe I am.
Daniel's boastful nature surfaced, and the smug look reappeared on his face.
I've always had a contingency in place in the event Isaac failed. Carlton's predictable. I knew he would hire someone to eliminate the threat. It just happened to be you.
He smiled and held the gun away from Jack's head.
Does this look familiar?
My SIG, Mercer said, remembering the police had confiscated it. I'm impressed. The one thing I don't understand is how you plan to escape. You shoot Jack, I shoot you.
Not quite. I shoot Jack with your gun, the police bust in, and I say I came to protect my brother. You go down. The evidence is against you. Who would believe a disgraced former military man who's already been accused of murdering his own wife? No one. And that's what makes this brilliant.
Except for the bullet through your brain, Mercer replied calmly.
You don't kill for sport. You didn't kill Armin, and you won't kill me,
Daniel shrugged.
It's that simple.
Pathetic, Mercer retorted, changing tactics. He lowered his gun and walked around the couch, taking a comfortable seat. The break-in was reported. The police shall be here momentarily, and you're the only one pointing a gun. It's game over.
Not if I do it now. I can kill Jack, shoot you, and claim it was self-defense.
You're forgetting one basic fact, Mercer replied, his finger twitching slightly at the notion of his next move.
What's that?
I work with a team. Bastion fired once, having snuck into the room during Daniel's long-winded diatribe, and landed a well-placed shot to Daniel's forearm, causing him to release Jack. Immediately, Mercer brought his gun up, firing a single shot to the side of Daniel's head. His skull blew apart, covering Jack in brain matter and skull fragments.
Dan?
Jack asked, teetering and collapsing to his knees. One look at his brother's lifeless form sent relief and sorrow through him. He backed away, becoming violently ill in the corner of the room. He swallowed uneasily, drawing his eyes upward to find Bastion assessing the displaced handgun. Slowly, he dragged himself to the couch.
You killed my brother.
Would you have preferred letting him kill you? Mercer asked.
No.
Jack swallowed again, and the sounds of heavy footsteps shook the apartment.
The serial number is the same. There's no doubt it's yours,
Bastion said.
Which means there's a cop on the take.
I told you that at the beginning. Mercer holstered his gun and raised his hands. Unfortunately, the next few hours won't be particularly pleasant, but the traitor might reveal himself. The police swarmed the apartment, separating the three men for questioning before anyone could be removed from the scene. Tex arrived, followed by the coroner and a few higher-ranked members of the police force. Mercer narrowed his eyes at them, wondering how many of them were corrupt.
"I'll take it from here,"
Roland said, dismissing the uniformed cop who had been questioning Mercer. "Detective," Mercer said, "notice anything strange about the handgun Daniel Pierce had in his possession? Like the fact that you confiscated it from me after the shooting at the hospital."
"Yeah."
Rollins glanced around the apartment.
"Let's head to the car."
Mercer stood, and the two went down the steps.
"I'm not telling you this, but a few batches of evidence went missing from the station yesterday. Some of it was related to the Styler case, including your gun."
He stopped Mercer at the car, opening the passenger's side door.
"Your people were snooping around. Did they take it?"
"No."
"Internal Affairs sent someone to investigate. They'll figure out what happened. In the meantime, you admitted to shooting Daniel Pierce in defense of his brother. From the whispers I'm hearing, Jack's corroborating your version of events."
"That's because I accurately described what occurred."
"Be that as it may, until it gets sorted, you'll be held at the station. The problem is," he put the car into drive, "if your insistence on police corruption is just as accurate, You can't afford to be stuck in a place where evidence goes missing."
He tossed a sideways glance at Mercer and remained silent for the rest of the drive to the police station. When he pulled into a space around back, he scanned the parking area.
"I can't believe I'm about to do this."
Rowlands cleared his throat and stared out the windshield.
"I forgot. I have a quick errand to run. You will wait in the car until I get back, all right?"
His eyes darted to the door, and Mercer understood.
"Thanks for helping us on this. If you hadn't gone inside when you did, Jack Pierce would be dead. You saved someone tonight, and in my book, that makes this an exception to the rule."
"But there are still unanswered questions."
"Just maintain a low profile while IA works out the kinks. I'll be in touch."
Rowlands exited the vehicle and entered the police station. Once the detective disappeared from sight, Mercer let himself out and set off in the direction of the safe house. Hailing the first cab he spotted, he got dropped off in the neighborhood, checked for a tail, and returned to update Katia and Ben. Chapter 37. The next few days were an exercise in patience. Katia and Ben bickered constantly. The person responsible for the attempt on Ben's life was dead, and Mercer was told to stay out of sight. The phone calls were just another annoyance. Carlton phoned multiple times a day to speak to Katia, apologizing and begging for his daughter to come home. Thus far, she wasn't willing to leave Ben's side until the police investigation concluded. Bastian was released from police custody 36 hours after the incident in Jack Pierce's apartment. The medical examiner determined Bastian didn't deliver the kill shot, which went along with the statements Mercer provided inside the apartment and Jack's testimony. However, while Baz was stuck in holding, he met the internal affairs investigator, Detective Smoltz. After Bastian answered more questions than he cared to, concerning Mercer's team, Carlton Road, Benjamin Styler, and the Pierce family squabble, Smoltz released Bastian on his own recognizance. Detective Rowlands and IAD had his contact information and warned him no one should leave town until the investigation into the evidence tampering and possible police involvement in an attempted homicide was resolved. Finally, on the fourth morning of bodyguarding hell, Bastian's phone rang. After answering, he passed it to Julian. Mercer glanced at the caller ID and took a deep breath. He wasn't in the mood for more police bullshit.
"We need to meet. Do you remember that diner we went to?"
Rowlands asked. "Are you planning to arrest me?"
"I'll see you in an hour."
Rowlands disconnected, and Mercer handed the phone back to Bastian.
"Good news?"
Bastian asked. "Our detective friend wants to meet. If you don't hear from me in 2 hours, I'll need a barrister and bail money."
"He won't arrest you,"
Bastian said.
"He's been pulling double duty, so he can't help IA investigate the corruption. Maybe he has news on who's trying to frame you."
"I could speculate." Mercer's mind drifted to Carlton's friendship with the homicide lieutenant. 2 hours. The clock starts now. When Mercer arrived at the diner, he took a seat at a booth in the back and waited for a squad of police officers to swarm the building. But that didn't happen. Instead, Detective Rowlands walked in, gestured for a cup of coffee, and sat down. The two remained silent until the waitress placed the steaming mug on the table and walked away. "What?" Mercer asked.
"I have good news and bad news. Which do you want first?"
Mercer stared at him.
"Fine, we'll start with the bad. There isn't enough evidence to support claims of corruption. Yes, the evidence went missing and someone tried to run you down after you left the station, but no one's talking. IA's focused on the homicide lieutenant, but you didn't hear that from me."
"He's Carlton Road's contact in the police department. Do you think the lieutenant also had a relationship with Daniel Pierce?"
"Yep."
Rowlands took a sip of coffee.
"Carlton must have brought his staff to a lot of city functions. Daniel Pierce and the lieutenant must have crossed paths. It would have been nice to ask Daniel about that, but dead men don't speak."
"Am I under arrest for his murder?"
"No, it was self-defense. Jack's let us go through some employee info from Pierce Industries. And we've searched Daniel's belongings and communications. You did this city a service. First of all, you took care of that contract killer. Second, you dealt with the man pulling the strings. Which leads me to my next question.
I'm waiting.
What are you going to do about the unidentified officers who covered for Daniel Pierce by attempting to make you look like a killer?
It's not my problem. Rollins stifled his chuckle.
Bullshit, it's not your problem. None of this was your problem, and yet you took care of it, even when I told you we didn't need the help.
Clearly you were wrong. Rollins reached into his back pocket for his wallet and laid a 5 on the table.
We might want to bring you in for questioning again, probably tomorrow afternoon. I'd suggest you terminate your employment and hit the road before that happens.
Was that the good news? Mercer asked, wondering why the detective was giving him and his team a free pass.
Yeah.
Later that evening, Carlton Road returned home from work. In the darkened expanse of his living room, he didn't notice Julian Mercer, seated in the armchair, his handgun sitting on the table a few inches away. Carlton poured himself a drink and turned. Startled, he dropped the glass, and it shattered on the floor. "Tell me why I shouldn't kill you," Mercer said.
You scared me. How did you get in here?
Carlton made a move toward the security system on the wall, so Mercer leaned forward, hovering closer to the weapon.
Where are my bodyguards?
I'm sure you'd prefer to have the rest of this conversation in private. Take a seat, Mr. Rode. Carlton sat on the couch, his gaze uneasily shifting to the weapon.
Let me guess. You want money?
I want assurances you will not interfere in your daughter's relationships. Right now, no one is entirely sure what role you played in the assault on Benjamin Styler. You're in the clear. He's alive, and whether the two of them remain together is none of your business. Her happiness should be your primary concern. Do not do anything to make her miserable. Do you understand?
Yes.
Good. Additionally, if you do anything to jeopardize John Welk's well-being, we will have a problem. He made a mistake and deserves a second chance. I trust that you will give him the opportunity to make amends.
Okay.
Carlton must have thought this was a business arrangement, because he relaxed.
Would you like your payment now?
Payment? I don't accept blood money.
It's not blood money. It's payment for services rendered. All I did was ensure Daniel could never pose a threat to Katya or anyone else again. I wish it could have gone another way.
Rubbish. You used everyone at your disposal to stack the odds in your favor. How long did you know Daniel was behind this? In your office, you swore you didn't have a clue, but you set a lot of things into motion very quickly.
That's a newsman's know-how. We're used to working with close deadlines.
He stood and went back to the wet bar, letting the broken glass crunch under the soles of his shoes. He poured another drink and took a sip.
I've been honest with you, Mr. Mercer. Katya is all I have left. I would do anything to protect her, even if it means paying you to kill a man.
He went to his desk and picked up a document-sized envelope.
But like you and your friend have said numerous times, you're not mercenaries. So I had to take additional measures to ensure you would take care of the problem.
You made sure the evidence that was stolen made it back into Daniel Pierce's hands, along with my personal firearm, just so I would act accordingly. That was a ridiculous gamble by an entitled, narcissistic egomaniac. Carlton smiled, returning to the couch and placing the envelope on the coffee table next to Mercer's handgun.
You give me far too much credit, Mr. Mercer. Daniel made contact with a mutual friend we have within the department, and word traveled back to me. Initially, my contact wanted to set up a sting to lure Daniel out of hiding, but after I presented him with my dilemma, we came up with a more permanent, foolproof solution. Don't forget, I'm nothing more than a businessman, with strong ties to only the most upstanding members of this community.
Bullshit.
Believe what you like, but justice has been served. Inside, you will find payment for the additional work your team has performed.
I don't want your money.
I figured as much, but there must be some agreement we can reach to keep you from sputtering your misguided beliefs concerning my involvement. Perhaps you'll consider some priceless information a fair trade?
What kind of information?
I made a few phone calls on your behalf. I'm not without friends, even in merry old England. In addition to your money, you will find a few newspaper articles detailing similar crimes that occurred over the span of a decade. A reporter's personal notes, photos, and police reports that were removed from the official public case file. It may inevitably provide a lead to your wife's killer. I believe that shall be sufficient consideration for our business to be concluded. I expect Katya to be home by the morning. Good evening, Mr. Mercer. You can see yourself out.
Chapter 38.
Are you sure, love?
Bastian asked.
You don't have to go back there. He's my father,
Katya insisted.
and it's about time we had this out.
She shifted her gaze to Mercer.
Don't worry. I won't lose your card. If anything out of the ordinary happens, you're my first and only phone call.
Emergencies only, Mercer said.
No problem.
She tossed him a smile.
Thank you. When you came rushing into that alley that dreadful night, I knew you were a hero.
She hugged him.
Thank you for exacting vengeance on my behalf. All right, then. Donovan will take you home and ensure your safety before he leaves. Hans will return Mr. Styler to his residence, and that shall be the last time you have to deal with us,
Bastian concluded. When the team dispersed, Bastian and Mercer scrubbed the safe house, eliminating any prints or DNA before repeating the same process with the vehicles. It was an old habit, but it never hurt to be cautious, particularly when the police were only hours away from knocking down the door. After a final check, they gathered their belongings and waited for a taxi to the airport.
Did you open the envelope yet?
Bastian asked. I don't believe him, Mercer replied, but every fibre of his being ached to see what was inside, to find that one clue that he was still missing.
You're afraid to believe him. Hope can be a crushing thing, but after the shite he put us through, it's the least he could do.
It's hush money.
So what? We'll let bygones be bygones for now.
What if it's like everything else we've read and uncovered over the last 2 years? What if there's nothing new? Michelle deserves peace.
So do you.
Bastian lifted the envelope out of the bag.
Shall I give it a look?
Baz. Mercer paused, unsure how to respond, knowing his friend would dig through this just as doggedly as he would. Whatever you do, never agree to let us take another one of these questionable jobs. We aren't investigators.
Can you repeat that for the recording?
Baz asked, and Mercer offered a rare smile. While they waited for the cab to the airport, Bastian opened the folder and began to read. Check out Betrayal, the second book in the Julian Mercer thriller series. This has been Condemned, Julian Mercer, Book 1. Written by g.k.parks. Narrated by Danny Holt. Copyright 2015 by g.k.parks. Production copyright by g.k.parks.